is your host, Susan Regan.
Hello, I'm Susan Regan, and I am your host for Connecticut Valley Views. It is indeed my pleasure today to have as my guest Dr. Armand Fusco. He and I are going to have a dialogue about something that is of great concern across our nation and in our state. And it is with regard to the curriculum as it is occurring in our school system and the issues surrounding it and the parental challenges that they are facing with their boards of education in each of the towns in Connecticut. So, Dr. Fusco, you've had over 40 years of experience at all levels of education. You've been a superintendent of schools. You became a director of interns at the University of Bridgeport for 10 years. Please take us through. I know you've written a couple of books and you're working on a third one, I believe. So please give your background and express yourself as you wish with regarding to your career.
Thank you so much, Susan. I think you've done a pretty good job of introducing me anyway. Use the time to give to the contents.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to be talking, as Susan said, about public education. Not the most exciting thing, but it is very, very, very important. The only way to really look at the condition of education today is to look at test scores as a start, because that's objective. Nobody could argue with the test scores. There are different tests that are global, nationwide, statewide. If you bring them all together, we don't have time to go through each and every one, but if you bring them all together, I can summarize them in a very few words. No progress has been made for 40 years. It sounds
That's
incredible,
scary.
I know.
Yeah.
But there's been no, it's been what they call flatline scores. However, if you separate the suburban schools from the city schools, huge difference, because the city schools will show a sharp drop where the suburban schools will show a sharp increase. So when you average them all together, it comes out flat. But when you use averages, it hides a lot of sins. So one test that came up very recently was done at the Hartford Courant in March 23rd. It was a headline about scores of students that went from their neighborhood schools in the city to choice schools. Choice schools are schools like magnet schools, charter schools, public even schools that take some of the charter schools, take some of the students with them. But they're limited because it depends on space. It's not that anyone could go there. It depends on the space. So very few get involved. However, the few that did get involved, the Courant followed up on them to find out how they did. And they looked at just a 2-year period of time from 2017 to 2019. And they looked at the specific choice schools that they selected and how they came out in terms of the tests. It was remarkable, absolutely remarkable, because they made progress in any one of the choices they made, except the charter schools were far ahead of all the other schools.
Now, that's a very striking point to make, because it does show that we need a change in educational reform, and that we need to inform the public as to that ability to choose something for their children going forward, and to know that the public schools are funded by the state, but also the magnet schools are as well.
That's correct. Yeah, it's a very good point. Of course, there's public charter schools and there's also private charter schools, so that makes a difference. Let me just give you one illustration. They were doing the comparison with language arts, and the comparison started with them at the school they were coming from. They call them neighborhood schools. It sounds like a nice school. I call them zombie schools because they don't belong in existence.
Okay.
They were at 16% in their zombie school. After 2 years in the charter school, they were at 50%. Absolutely remarkable. It usually takes 3 to 5 years to make that kind of a gain.
So, Dr. Fusco, let me ask you an important question. Is it is the curriculum, it is not the teachers, but the curriculum that makes the difference. Is that correct?
It's a combination of both.
Okay.
Because you have to have an effective teacher, and that includes, of course, the curriculum. They've got to know how to handle that curriculum and get it delivered to the students. Some teachers do a very good job, others are not so good. But that's where the whole issue is in terms of curriculum, and that's what's really changing, particularly over these past few years.
Now, Doctor, let me ask you another question. If, in fact, this is a good way to go, do you feel that this is actually being implemented, saying that you have facts and you have proof? Are they implementing that plan or procedure to improve grades?
Having the proof apparently means nothing to them.
I see.
They are not expanding the charter school system, even though the results are there to say they work. Some charters are lousy. There's no question about it. It's just like anything else. You're going to find some bad ones. But for the most part, they are achieving beyond expectations, including graduation rates. They graduate approximately 92 to 100% of their students, where the city schools are at around 75% graduation rates.
I see.
And that's being generous, because it's probably closer to 50% if they're honest.
Now, are they changing the parameters? In other words, allowing some people to give a fail or pass? Or do you feel that we are actually measuring correctly what we consider graduating? Is that improved, or has that been lessened so that you can easily move out of high school and be unprepared for college or even possibly a trade school?
You're bringing up a whole another topic, but let me answer it this way.
Okay.
The cheating that goes on is remarkable. If they don't like the results, they simply change standards. So if you have a state test, you can change the standards. In spite of what most school systems say that they're raising standards, 2/3 of the states have lowered their standards.
Oh dear.
Some states have even eliminated failing grades. You can't get a failing grade. California, as an example, passed legislation. Even if you don't pass the state test, you still graduate. So that tells you what's going on out there.
Yeah, right. Well, how do you see us changing this? How are we going to reform education and improve things? Because quite honestly, the future of this state and the future of the students themselves and their ability to become a successful contributing participant and employed well and be able to have a family and to seek their American dream. How are we going to change this? I know you've written books on this. How are we going to make a difference?
It's not going to be easy because there's a lot of politics involved. And you've got a situation, whether people like to hear it or not, there is no really interest in improving minority learning in the cities.
Why is that? Who is stopping that? Who is preventing that?
It's the local districts that have control over it. It's not the state. So any school district could eliminate a failing school with a stroke of the pen. It's that simple.
Okay. And yet what they tell us is, what we know is that basically speaking, across the board in 169 towns, the education budget is usually the largest part of the town's finances.
Correct.
And yet they keep telling us we must pour more money into towns, into cities like Bridgeport and Hartford and Waterbury, all of these areas. So we put more money in, but they're failing.
That's correct. All the results or the outcomes show it. The per pupil ratio of teacher to students or class size has been cut in half. It's gone from 28 to 15. In Connecticut, it's 13. In my town of Guilford, it's down to 12. How much lower can you go? They poured more money into the schools every year. Doesn't make a difference. They've also added more non-classroom teacher supports from non-professionals. They used to be 1 to 4. Now it's equal. They've added that many more people, not just teachers to cut down the class size, but also the support staff to help the teachers. None of that has made a difference. None of it.
All right. So if we were to take students from Hartford and to put them into a town where we felt that they had the right curriculum, the right teachers, a more successful picture, does it make a difference? I mean, has there been testing of that? Does it make a difference? Do they learn better? Do they have they got an ability to face the challenges going forward, perhaps, as I said, to college? Does it make a difference if you do that?
Absolutely. That's what that Hartford Current study showed.
All right.
It makes a huge difference. And in a very short period of time. You don't need a lot of time.
Then why can't they use the template in the successful educational towns as a template for the Hartford schools, since we're pouring money into it? Why can't they do that?
I don't want to say what I'm going to say. I'm going to quote somebody else who said the same thing, though.
All right.
We want to keep them on the plantation.
I see.
In other words, keep them dumbing on the farmers, the way I would put it.
Oh, it's
There's
very
no
sad.
interest, because all of these cities basically are controlled by the Democrats. They're supposed to be for the racial agenda.
Yes.
Yet they're in control of the schools in terms of the Board of Education and everything else that goes with it. Yet they're not closing these these failing schools.
Well, why can we not have a template that works across the board, a template for the curriculum, the way you do it, the format, the amount of time spent, the right classes, the right courses, and leaving out Common Core? Why can we not just take the template that works in one town and move it over? You say they're not interested, that they don't want to improve the opportunity, because what it means is we are spending more per student and getting lower grades.
Correct. It's very complicated because you can't use just one template. The circumstances in each of the towns are different. Demographically, for example, in Guilford, as an example, we have a minority population of only 7%. If you go to Hartford, the minority population is closer to 95%. You're talking with a totally different group of students. You're talking a totally group of teachers, even the kind of teacher that goes to a suburban school versus the type of teacher that goes into a city school.
Okay.
So you got some of those kind of factors built in.
Okay.
And then you also have the factor of liberal versus conservative, unfortunately. That's getting involved with all of this.
All right.
So you could have a template, as the state of Connecticut showed, in terms of having a choice for parents.
Right.
So they're not being mandated to follow only one particular approach. They have a choice to say yes or no. They've given the model, but whether they follow it or not, we'll find out in September when they have to implement what they came up with. So let me address what they did.
Yes.
The legislation was passed a couple of years ago to have the State Department of Education come up with a plan to address the racial issue because of George Floyd situation. And what they did was, it astounded even me.
Okay.
They put together 9 subcommittees, 9 subcommittees to address all different issues involved.
Okay.
They had 200 participants in all of these different committees.
Okay. All
They
right.
studied it for months, not days or weeks. They studied it for months.
Okay.
And they came up finally with a decision. And I thought it was going to be some massive kind of activity.
Yes.
Because again, it's a blue state. They're for the racial agenda.
Yes.
I thought they were going to mandate something huge. All they mandated was one course in Black and Latino studies to be implemented in 2023. All school districts have to have that course. But there's a big but that a lot of people don't know about. It's an elective for students. They don't have to take it. They've
I
given
see.
choice to the parents and the students. Now that's a win-win situation for everybody. If you want to go with that agenda, you go with it. If you don't, you can say, we don't want our child in there, or the student could say it because it's high school.
I see. All right.
So
And-
they
but-
they put together a nice, I was surprised. I thought it was going to be a very difficult model. This was a very simple one.
Mhm. So it wasn't a mandate, it was an option.
It was an option. It
All right, so-
mandated to present it, but not an option, not a mandate to take it.
Okay, so there seems to be, and as I understand it, in Guilford, there seems to be, however, a unilateral decision that the parents seem to have no say-so in the curriculum, and even though there are issues, and I think what we're talking about is CRT, critical race theory.
Correct.
All right, and that also there's sexual gender courses that are being given to very young students. And this seems to be an issue by some of the parents who say you're taking away our parental authority. And they often will say, no, we're not teaching CRT, we're not doing that. But it's a kind of a cloaked subject. And the fact of the matter is that some of the superintendents have actually bought books about transgendering and sexual orientation and actually handed it out in class. Am I correct about that?
You are absolutely correct.
Okay.
That happened in Guilford.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as we're at that stage, let's talk about what's happened in Guilford.
Sure.
I've been in this town for 35 years,
Yes.
so I know the town.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard ever of any kind of a racial issue in this town, ever.
Mhm.
This is the friendliest town on the shoreline. At
Mm-hmm.
least we used to say that. Now they have fractured the town because of this problem with the schools. The superintendent has not come up to this point, has not produced a single piece of statistical evidence to show there's a need of any kind to
Mhm.
address racial issues. What he came up against, if you want to say he came up against,
Yes.
is he went to a football game
Okay.
and a student showed up in a black face.
Oh.
That set him off for some reason. So then he made a 55-minute speech on video for the public to address what happened with that one black face out of 3,100 students.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, he said they got about 200 emails demanding what he called action. Well, demanding what action?
Mhm.
There was nothing explicit. They didn't follow up on those 200 emails to find out what is it the parents and students and former teachers were talking about for taking action. What does that
Mhm.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
But he took it to mean he could do anything he wanted. He then purchased a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist for every teacher, K through 12,
Mm-hmm.
which means that's where he wants this to go, even though the state is saying, we don't want it done in the elementary schools. It's too
Oh,
complex.
All right.
It's
Okay.
not age appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to make any difference with this
Mhm.
guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been a superintendent of the year. This is not someone who doesn't know what he's doing. He's
What do
very
you
competent.
yeah, so you actually don't know why he suddenly has had this epiphany that this is the
No.
right thing to do.
There's got to be a reason. I wish I knew what it was. You know, I could suspect the reason, but I hate to speculate.
Mm-hmm.
But my feeling is he's been in a town too long, and maybe he's looking for a way out, and he wants something grander. That's what I think is happening.
But that's not a great legacy to leave behind.
Well, he thinks it is.
Hmm.
He's got a group of superintendents who's working with him that
Mhm.
are all for this. And this is the narrative of the Democratic Party.
Mhm.
It's the narrative of the new Commissioner of Education.
Mhm.
So he thinks he's on board, and he thinks everybody should be on board.
Okay, so you're saying that this has always been a friendly town, you've never had any issues and so forth. Are you seeing any input from any African-American or Hispanic or other than white parents who are not happy with the current situation that the superintendent is, the stance that he's taking? Have they commented on it or not?
Yes, some of the minority students have.
Mhm. Mhm.
but it's all general. I mean, nothing is substantiated. Nothing is classified in any way. You can't, for example, the 1.3% of minority students are Black. That's about 40 students.
Okay.
You could almost eliminate the girls. The girls don't have the problem. Girls are doing far better than the boys.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right. And that would be, what's your guess at that? Because
the girls have advocates, the boys don't. It's as simple as that.
I see. Okay.
Boys have no advocates. That was a book I was working on before this broke out. I was calling it the boys' pandemic, academic pandemic. You can't read, you can't learn. And that's a problem with the boys, particularly Black boys. And it's not the fault of the Black boys. They develop later than the girls.
Well, that's true. Yes, you're right. They often do say that the girls are ahead emotionally and otherwise. That's true.
That's correct. They catch up eventually, but not in the beginning.
Right. Well, here's what I don't quite understand. We have to leave room for people to have their opinions on CRT and the sexual thing. I mean, that is part of our democracy, is the First Amendment, to have the ability to speak your position. That is part of what we believe in. However, what I see objectively is I look at it, and I have 3 grown sons, and they were well educated, and they're all very successful in their respective careers, and there have been no issues, and things have gone well. But in any case, my point being is, what happened to reading, writing, and arithmetic? If we're going to be, whether it's an elective or not an elective. I mean, your elective used to be whether you're going to take a cooking class or you were going to take a shop class. Now the elective is this. And the fact is that are we going to learn the real history of the country, and are we going to learn to memorize our multiplication tables, or are we going to learn the basic things that get you through life?
No.
Oh.
And it's happening. I can give an example right now with mathematics. Mathematics is racist. Would you believe that? It's racist. How is 1 + 1 = 2 racist?
Okay.
And that has to be looked at through the lens of racism when you do mathematics.
I see.
And that's changing how teachers are supposed to instruct the students, because if they're minority, they're supposed to use their background from what they call culturally responsive education.
I see.
But it's not working. It hasn't worked. It's never worked. And so that's one of the big problems out there that you have to face, that it's really a very complex kind of situation. And in Guilford, he went well beyond doing what he's supposed to do as a superintendent.
Yes.
Made a lot of mistakes, and I'll point some out to you. The first mistake was from the Board of Education. Would you believe that there's a law in the books, Public Law 10-220, subsection small e, that has to do with the duties of Board of Education. One of those duties is to appoint a district curriculum committee.
Okay.
There's no district curriculum committee.
Oh.
I asked for it. There's none. Why haven't they done it? I don't even know if they know they're supposed to do it.
Huh. This seems uninformed. They're uninformed in their own Robert's Rules of Order.
Right. On top of that, they have what is called a policy manual. That's their Bible, how the school system runs.
Okay.
And there's a whole section there on curriculum development. Very, very specific of what you're supposed to follow. For example, when you do a change in curriculum, you're supposed to end up with what are the outcomes that you expect from the students? What is they supposed to learn or acquire? What skills, what information, etc. They haven't come up with any outcomes of any kind except one.
Well, okay.
We're developing critical thinkers. Well, how do you develop critical thinkers with only one theme?
Right.
One approach.
Correct. Now, let me just say here, a lot of parents, when they're disappointed in what's going on, they homeschool. Do they have to be homeschooling according to and in parallel with what's going on in the schools?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Oh, okay.
They
So
are
it's
free
independent.
to do what they want to do.
Oh,
Most of them belong to a homeschool association that provides them with a lot of the curricular materials.
mhm.
It's not that they have to develop their own.
Yes.
And they then take it from there. Now here you got people, parents, some with no college education, some without a high school education, teaching their kids. And they teach them to read with no problem. How come we can't do it in schools?
Yeah, exactly. Well, another point I want to bring up, we are coming close to the time for ending this extremely interesting subject, I think, and will be of great interest to people out there. And that's just to bring them up to date to the fact that the money in the town, if the student is going to be transferred to another school, the money no longer follows the student. And yet, so the towns are keeping the money, and then the state is funding the student at the new school. So it's kind of double dipping.
That's right. The solution is the money should follow the student that's being spent. Why doesn't it follow the student? That would change everything. That would change everything.
Yes.
But they don't want that to happen.
Yeah. Well, we got taxpayer dollars here. We've had taxpayer dollars here, and this is one of the things, the bottom line, we have to look at what our budget will be going forward. And parents, families, business leaders, individuals who have their own businesses, small businesses, they're counting on the fact that we have to deal with inflation, higher prices across the board, gas, food. And the fact is that this is, as I said before, the budget for education. And we have special education we have to deal with too, which grows every year. So I think this has been, I think we've basically hit the tip of the iceberg. And we have a lot more to face. And I want to encourage people to look for your books. And I think if they write to you, they can get more information. I'd like to give your email address. And that is Fusco, FUSCO.A@comcast.net. And I appreciate your time, your wisdom, your experience. And I very much appreciate you being a guest on my show.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
All right. This is Susan Regan signing off today. It's been my pleasure to have Dr. Armand Fusco on as my guest. And please write to him. And I'm sure that he will be able to provide you with the books that he has written. And I encourage you to see all of our programs on our website, which is ctvalleyviews.com. It is my pleasure to thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you. Good night.